Thank you, everyone, for spending time this morning and joining the conversation featuring our 2020 Ragdale Ring project winners, Ashley Bigham and Erik Hermann of the architecture team Outpost Office. My name is Regina Gloria, and I'm the Director of Education here at Ragdale, and we're very pleased to host this program every week as Ragdale continues to remain close to artists in residence due to the pandemic. We're currently unable to bring our artists to the schools, so we very much appreciate you coming to us here on the internet for this virtual classroom. We'll be recording all of these POV artist talks, and captions will be provided for the final edited version, which will be available on our website for viewing again a little bit later. And of course, everything will be free and available to everyone at ragdale.org. I am very pleased and honored to welcome Ashley Bigham and Erik Hermann here, who are both assistant professors of architecture at the Knowlton School at The Ohio State University. Their collaborative practice, Outpost Office, seeks new public audiences through experimental creative production, ranging from the serious to the absurd, often simultaneously. Both of them have been Walter B. Sanders Fellows at the Taubman College of Architecture. Ashley has been a Fulbright Scholar in Ukraine, and Erik is a German Chancellor Fellow of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation and a MacDowell Colony Fellow. And both have a very long list of collaborators in the field and institutional support from places such as the University of Michigan, Cranbrook Museum, and the US State Department, amongst others. And both of them will be in conversation with Greg Corso and Molly Hunker, the team making up the Sports Collaborative. If you recall, they're the 2016 Ragdale Ring winners and produced the award-winning project Rounds. It was this fabulous ribbon-like structure that literally had people running around all over it. The circular structure was definitely a popular and celebrated ring design. And of course, our very own Sam Lewis, Director of Communications here at Ragdale. He's also the main curator of the ring performances. He'll be moderating the conversation. He's a performer and puppeteer himself and was a resident here a few years back. So he'll be working closely with all of the artists to help present some very exciting happenings on and around the ring stage, which of course is a very unique year this year. Before I turn it over to him, just a reminder, we do have some time for questions. So if you do come up with some questions you'd like to ask the artists, write them down in the chat box and we'll get to them at the end. And I will turn it over to you, Sam.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Really excited to be in conversation with these wonderful people. And I'm just really excited about the project this year in general, from a staff perspective and also from a curatorial perspective. And so I wanted to start the conversation by first just, again, officially congratulating Erik and Ashley on winning the contest. And, you know, for those who don't know, obviously Ragdale was really, the space was created by an architect. And so architecture and supporting architecture and celebrating architecture is a huge part of the foundation of this organization. And not only do we like celebrating that, but I think this contest really pushes the genre, the medium forward. And so we're really kind of over the moon excited about that. So congratulations to Erik and Ashley, Outpost Office, for the win. And so I just wanted to start just by kind of getting a background, your background, and how architecture became something that you thought you could do as a career and become interested in the first place.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having us. And thank you to Ragdale for continuing to support this project, even in uncertain times, which makes it even more important than ever, I think. So we actually both grew up in Tennessee, different parts of Tennessee, of course. Didn't know each other growing up, but we actually met in undergraduate education at the University of Tennessee. And so that's where we met and began collaborating there as students. I think, for me personally, grew up not really, I'd never met an architect. I didn't really know what an architect was. I didn't really know what architecture, you have an idea about buildings. Like, okay, architecture has something to do with buildings. But I didn't always, growing up know that, but I was always interested in very creative practices. So I was really into arts and crafts. So I really loved, like even just literature and writing. So kind of expressive creative outlets. I always found myself gravitating towards those things. And then, it kind of, as I got into high school and just started thinking about going to college, okay, what are some professions that I could, take these creative outlets that I had and sort of direct that to a career in something. And so without knowing it, architecture seemed, okay, I'll give that a try. And, a few years into undergraduate, I really started to understand what architecture was, what it meant, what its role in society was, how it can really influence people, how it can help people. And really fell in love with it then, and that's when I really think I kind of came into my own as understanding what architecture was for me.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience, and I would say that one of the things that I found is that the reasons that I got into architecture aren't the same reasons that I stay in architecture, and I think that the Ragdale Ring is an example of why precisely I stay in architecture, which is that it's a place that's constantly inviting reinvention. It's a place that overlays kind of creative desires, but folds that into service. It's a service industry, and it's meant for people. And so I think that, Sam, as you mentioned, like the Ring is such a kind of fabulous gathering place for already in the kind of past 8 years, an amazing kind of cross-section of experimental design. And that's part of why we wanted to have sports join us today. We still consider their Ring, although there have been many great ones, the kind of category killer, the kind of perfect Ring. And so I think that if you look through the profile of these different projects, you see attention maybe being paid more to like gravity and physics like last year, or this year maybe it's more about kind of movement and vector. And with Molly and Greg, it was more about like a kind of intensity of geometry and how that created gathering, and they can speak to that. But this is why like architecture continues to kind of surprise and thrive for us. And so that's why we stick with it, because it's always not easy.
Absolutely. And I didn't realize you all were Tennesseans. I was actually born in Tennessee myself. And so I would ask, which one of the 3 Tennessees were you born in?
Middle.
East.
And I'm from West. So
Yay!
we got it.
We got it all together here. That's awesome.
We got the whole flag here then.
Yes. And so, yeah, speaking of Greg and Molly, I know you touched on them. When I was about to come to Ragdale for my residency in 2018, I Googled images of Ragdale to kind of get an idea of what I was going to be experiencing. And I saw the rounds structure, and I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to play on that thing. And this is 2018. So when I got there, I was like, it's not here. Where is it? Where is that thing? And then that was my first introduction to kind of the temporary nature of, yes, there it is. Absolutely. I was like, what's going on here? That's it. My first lesson in the temporary nature of the Ring in this competition. And yes, so beautiful. I wish I could have experienced it in the real world, but I just had to like imagine how I would have interacted. So yeah, I want to bring Greg and Molly into this conversation and just kind of get your thoughts on why you chose that particular design. And then I know we were talking prior, so this is a 2-part. I know we were talking prior to starting this meeting today, and you all had a couple of interesting questions and observations for Erik and Ashley. So if you could kind of reiterate those questions, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so I think that in terms of our Ragdale Ring design, we were super excited about the opportunity that Ragdale presents. Just as Ashley and Erik were talking about, this is a pretty unique scenario for an organization to give over so much kind of creative freedom to someone to really kind of experiment and explore their own kind of creative process and things that they're working on, things that they're thinking. about, it was like an incredible experience for us because we had been entering a lot of design competitions at the time, and this was the first opportunity to build something at this scale. And so that's a huge step forward in our careers as young architects and designers. And so we were thinking about, the kind of the way that performers and audience members alike might sort of engage with this space of performance and try to really activate that in a way that maybe has some ambiguity or vagueness, isn't so prescribed, like this is where you sit and this is where you perform, like maybe a normal kind of stage scenario might set up. We're trying to kind of twist those together a little bit and allow the various curators and performers over the course of the summer to re-envision how that might work with this really formal vocabulary, as well as the residents who were going to be using the project kind of as a huge piece of garden furniture or something, right, during the rest of the time. And I think that in some ways, even though Ashley and Erik's project looks extremely different from ours, right? It's sort of immaterial and transient and mobile and constantly changing, and whereas ours was more static and very physical and very formal. I think there's a similarity there that there's a kind of ambiguity to and lack of kind of prescribed use that is being explored as well, which I think is such a like exciting place for this type of project to be. From my perspective, it gives over some of the, it allows the performers to really interpret these spaces in new ways, which then the architects or designers are really entering into a collaboration with any given performer, and how that might play out. We don't know, and we don't want to know. We want the performer to come up with something new, and there's always that kind of surprise, kind of as Erik was saying. So I think that's a really sort of exciting relationship, even though the two projects look very different. There's certainly some shared common conditions in terms of how the designers and performers might sort of operate together.
Yeah, because it seems like there's like both in a way, and it's probably one of the reasons that we got to our design and we're excited about it for reasons of people, Sam, like you getting there as an artist and engaging with it. And it seems like Erik and Ashley's project and ours, how different they are, share this sort of, there's this character involved. There's like a protagonist in it. And, ours was this sort of, worm that was on the site, and your guys' I think is a quite a bit more sophisticated, but, and also physical and digital in terms of it being able to access. I mean, you guys can maybe talk a little bit more explicitly about it, but I think there's this role of this project not just being a thing, but it also being a kind of character in the lives of the space and the lives of the visitors.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Like we really, we're thinking a lot about yours and the kind of this exact relationship, like the kind of specificity of it, very specific form, right? And geometry was in the drawings and it was translated on the site, but a certain open-endedness to it that really invited like just amazing ways for people to kind of occupy it. It's almost like a kind of instrument that the audience kind of learns how to tune and perform on. And we thought about a lot of that with ours. Maybe we could offer just a little kind of overview of the project. I think we showed a video at the beginning.
Yeah. Or Sam might have a question directed towards that.
No, I think great. Please give an overview, because I think it's really important that people kind of understand the project, because it can take people, leaving them with questions for sure.
Totally. So just from a kind of 10,000 feet perspective, maybe provided by this image you're seeing here from our website, the idea for this year's ring is to use a field marking robot. This is a GPS controlled semi-autonomous robot. Its typical application is used to mark sports fields. So you can actually look this up if you'd like and play along at home. The company is called Turf Tank. And there's several different companies that do this, but Basically what happened is that the Ragdale competition has been a laboratory for our practice for the past 3 years. We're not always in the winner's circle. But each time we've put together a design that speaks to things that we were working out in our practice actively. And so this year, there was a series of kind of really serendipitous things that all came together, as they probably do with any project that kind of lands with the audience. The first was that we had already been thinking about applying these robots in a different context. We've had this real growing interest in understanding how techniques from painting or techniques from drawing can kind of generate space in a more explicit way. The second was that this year's Ragdale theme was actually mobility, which now seems like just kind of incredibly prescient as a theme. And so a couple days before the competition was due, we threw together this video that you're seeing now, which basically shows one of these robots kind of working its way through a clearing at Ragdale and leaving behind this trace of a drawing. And then the drawing actually would disappear after about a week. And so the project is really about beginning to understand how we can work within these current constraints. So once we were awarded the project, we've been in a dialogue with Ragdale basically about how we can make this project happen at a time when site access is limited, at a time when we don't expect to do a traditional residency, at a time when we don't want to expose a lot of our colleagues or students to ourselves or to contexts that might endanger them. And so, yeah, it's just a lot of things kind of lining up in a really beautiful way. And now because the Ragdale's approach is so experimental, we're also thinking about what this means in terms of how the project performs. So a series of kind of sessions where we come back and we draw something new each time learning iteratively from the process. So in that way, we're trying to understand what are kind of the advantages of maybe not being able to build one big thing. What are the advantages of something that disappears after a week? What are the advantages of something that doesn't take labor and doesn't take a takedown? And that speaks to kind of budgetary constraints as well. So it's a whole host of questions. And one thing that I want to point out, which is something that we wanted to highlight based on our conversations with Ragdale so far, is the way this fits into our larger practice. We were just talking with Molly and Greg about this, so I'll just go to another piece on our website here. We've got a past project we did at the Tallinn Biennale in Estonia this past year called Another Campo Marzio, which is essentially a drawing machine, but we're using another off-the-shelf solution. In this case, we're using a dot matrix printer, which some people might be more familiar with than others. And this printer actually is attached to a small computer, which produces randomized patterns, which print out over time and produce this kind of continuous urban pattern. So this was a kind of speculation on how do you work with history as architects, but it was also a performance. It literally like printed over time. And so it's so exciting because Ragdale is giving us the context as a practice to take this idea and spatialize it. Mm-hmm. And the idea is not necessarily the forms that you're seeing here. We're not going to use the same kind of source material, but the idea is very simply, how can you use drawing and how can you let that drawing unfold over time to create different spatial possibilities? So that's a lot, but that's kind of the kind of arc of where the project came from and where it kind of sits in our current efforts.
Right on, that's amazing. So, you know, people often talk of different schools of architecture. And so does this belong to a school of architecture, and who and what were some of your inspirations to go into this direction?
Yeah, so a lot of the inspiration comes from past rings. Like it comes from this kind of like emerging body of work where Ragdale is kind of learning how to use the space and reconcile with its history of performance and finding new ways to elaborate that. A lot of our interest in drawing in this way comes from automated drawings. Mm-hmm. We look a lot at early computer artists. And our interest in those patterns is this idea that you can start with a really simple set of elements, and by combining them in novel ways, you can produce a lot of different effects. I think it maybe, I don't know where it fits in the kind of schools of architecture, but there's certainly here, again, like another alignment with the effort of Sports and Molly and Greg's project, where I think there's a kind of fundamental notion of simpler, very explicit architectural and geometric elements, and then it's through a kind of combinatorial game that something new is offered.
Yeah, and I think we've been very interested in color lately, and so for that, of course, we look at artists, we look at painters. So there are a few artists who have done similar things by hand, not with a robot, but here we were looking again to kind of combine this idea of the human artistic creative endeavor with something which is a little bit more structured, and that we're kind of feeding it through an algorithmic system. And then another thing that if we think about kind of modern architecture from the 1920s to the 1950s, just kind of generally, a lot of times in history we're taught that architecture was all white and everything was white and as minimal as possible, and to some extent of course that's really true, but sometimes when we go and visit buildings by Le Corbusier or other architects, you actually realize that the photographs are in black and white, but the spaces are really colorful, and that color actually doesn't come through in a lot of the historical documentation, sometimes because it was taken away or whatever. And so we were really interested in kind of bringing that back, and even then there are kind of postmodern examples of using pattern as well. So using color and pattern. And then in our previous, some of our previous, or ongoing, really this is an ongoing project, we've actually looked at polychromy, which is a really ancient actually way of using color in architecture. So if you think about the Pantheon or, the Parthenon, for example, of course, again, it's all white now when we look at it. And so for many years, people thought it was built and was white, but now we know it was really painted really bright, vivid colors. And so we're kind of looking at color throughout different time periods of architecture.
And while the demo video we're showing here was the kind of white painting, Sam, when you first started, you showed another version that we've done where we're exploring like pink and green. And this is kind of an incredible moment because we're able to pick up painting techniques. And so all colors are kind of equal. Each color costs the same. And so we'll get a lot of opportunities to start experimenting with that.
I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit more about how the patterns and colors would be decided, because it seems like such a cool opportunity right now, given the sort of forced remoteness that we all have to Ragdale, that maybe the way this thing gets programmed could even get outsourced or affected by people who are remote, even students and things like that they could get involved in a way in this project that isn't possible in a normal Ragdale Ring. But here, because of actually the constraints, now it opens up a whole new opportunity for kind of engagement, remote engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a great point, and something that we see as a real potential and a real benefit to this project evolving over the summer, instead of doing this intensive, live, build, construct period, which is not, available during coronavirus, but actually now opens up this whole new way of viewing the project, which is a series of architectural performances as well as musical and dance performances, but that we can actually learn from the process, and also take feedback from people. So if we kind of develop a language of shapes that work well with the robot, then actually offering those shapes up to kids to sketch and draw, and then we can try to kind of print their patterns or anybody who wants to interact, or maybe it's a collaboration more with specific dancers or specific musicians who, movement artists who are interested in certain types of movement, and then we can kind of adapt and we work together. I think all of those things are really exciting for us. One, architecture is typically thought of as very permanent, but in our work, we do a lot of more temporary architecture, or architecture that's a kind of interior architecture, things that we know are only going to be around for a few years, a few months, a few weeks, depending on what the timeline of that project and what the needs of that project are. And so this will be actually the kind of shortest time that we've really worked with. It's going to last for a week or two, but we get to do it again. So really the project itself lasts 6 months, just in its actual action. But the documentation, like you say, it's the drone footage or, filming the dancers interacting with it, that kind of documentation lives on. And we're really excited that Ragdale uses those outlets and, things like this, where we're here on Zoom talking about it, using all different digital formats to engage as many people as possible in this kind of 6-month project. So you guys are all, like, everyone here in this call is like part of the project in a way, because we will be reflecting on this conversation, when we do the first performance.
Yeah. And I think also,
go on, please, Erik.
No, I would just say that, like, I really like that point, Molly, because I think it's about kind of, again, like digging out and beginning to understand all the kind of opportunities that are here. And I think it goes hand in hand too with limits that will emerge. So what's interesting about this is that when you sit down and say, okay, I'm going to draw this pattern on the field, you think you can kind of do anything, but the robot will have certain kinetics, so certain like ways it can operate. The computer sees the world differently. It only sees actually its GPS location, which is based on a satellite. So trees can interfere with it knowing where it is. And so actually beginning to understand how valuable it is that despite how digital and abstract this feels, that Ragdale is giving us the opportunity to like get on the ground and try it. And I think as we like encounter those limitations, this will also play like a really important role. So maybe the pattern is quite stable in the middle and gets erratic at the edges, not because we design it that way, just the robot just gets lost. And that starts to tell us the way that the robot sees the site, which is a really kind of intriguing dimension to this. And maybe it might help us like dovetail a little bit with the pedagogical goals of Ragdale to educate students about robotics and the kind of possibilities.
Well, and also I think access, right? Like the fact that this can have remote engagement changes the access that various people, whether it's because various groups don't have the same access to Ragdale specifically or to art and design in general, or an age group, right, that may not normally think about engaging in this. All of a sudden that access is really different, and that's really cool. Like it's weird that because we can't get to the site, somehow its reach is broader. But I think that's really a really exciting opportunity of this particular project this year.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yes, indeed. Awesome. And, we touched on it, but speaking of things from a curatorial standpoint, I'm really excited for the prospect of kind of engaging from an artistic standpoint, curating artists that that engage with it. My phone is ringing over there. But that's one a really exciting thing to me, to kind of pick artists that are open to interacting with the robot and will challenge you from an architectural standpoint, but then also be challenged. Because I know whenever I'm doing a gig, like I've done, been in several bands, and when we're like, okay, we're going to be playing at this venue, and we're like, okay, that place has a small stage, we have to adjust how we do this thing, or this place, it gets loud, or we're outside for this particular festival. And so all of that goes into how you will present your work. And so this is like the ultimate challenge of how you're going to present your work, and also the ultimate opportunity to kind of drive new modes of thinking with your own craft as an artist, which I feel like is super exciting, because you're always looking for a prompt that's going to bring something out that will feel new to you and kind of reinvigorate you as an artist. And so I'm just really excited. I already have, some people that I have in mind to engage with this, and I think you all are going to love them and love working and collaborating with them. And just even speaking in terms of collaborating, because usually the ring is there, this is what you have, you can engage with it, but then, the architects are they're gone at that point. And so this is like really exciting on so many levels. And I know that one of the, the videos, the animations that we've been showing are all from this very high vantage point. And I don't think that really anyone has seen the campus from that perspective. Okay, now my desktop grandfather clock is going off. This is like sounds, so many sounds. But, you know, when we're going to try to engage with that and hopefully be able to show your work from that perspective and from that vantage point, which I think just of its very nature kind of challenges people to think of things in different ways. And in this time of tremendous change and opportunity for change and kind of improving systems and ways of doing things, I think it is just so timely.
Yeah. No, Sam, that's a great point, because I think that, you know, one of the things that we're keenly aware of, because we came to see a living picture performance from our colleagues from Team, another like fabulous ring installation. That was our way of coming to know the Ragdale site, right? And so that way of knowing the site was very intimate and very specific. And so what we're excited about is like, how can this, as you're saying, be another way to let people know about the site, another way into the site? And so maybe, as you're suggesting, it's more of a kind of top-down perspective, and it speaks to all the kind of exciting things happening on the campus with the new construction. It speaks to all the kind of different places on the campus that can now be venues, because our piece can actually have quite a small footprint. And so that's why we're really interested too in understanding how to expand questions of how the project gets documented and how it gets shared, because it's so important to kind of learn how to tell the story in a new way.
So I know I saw a comment flash by on the chat that someone said it reminds them of their Roomba, and I was thinking of that, and then I also think of the robotic lawnmowers. I know that Lake Forest Library has one, and they named the robot, and people just had a lot of fun with it, and we're obviously going to be thinking about coming up with a name and trying to figure out the personality of the robot that's going to be used in this project. And so that's just like this further kind of integration of what may become our robot overlords. But, you know, it's in this case, I feel like it's pretty benevolent.
Yeah.
So I know, Regin, I want to do a time check, because I do definitely want to save some time for questions from the audience, and thank you all for joining. I think we have 20 or so people on here, so
yeah, we'll open it up as the questions come in. I know that Judith had a question about that initial animation. You know, it looked like the robot was looking for something, which is, I think, fairly related to everything you guys were talking about, this sort of idea of what the performance is, how it exists as an actual object.
Yeah.
Is it looking for something? Is it something that, you know, is the type of question that the artists are going to have to be asking, or is it completely not relevant once the print or the painting is done?
Right. Well, I think that's just such a kind of brilliant question, because actually, like, when we produce these patterns and we look at it from this perspective, I think it's easy to get caught up in just the aesthetics of the pattern, the visuality of the pattern, right? And so it's interesting to think about the way that the robot begins to try and move through the site, and its movements and the way it explores the site will kind of give it a personality. And I think that that's really intriguing as a question. It actually reminds me, Claude Shannon, who was a pioneer of the information age, one of the things he did at Bell Labs was he made a digital labyrinth. So he created this maze, and then it would be like the mouse that scientists would use to kind of test if they could go through the maze quickly. He made an electronic one. And so this little mouse would this electronic mouse would navigate the maze and solve it. And there was one time where it hit a dead end, and it just kept bumping up against the dead end. And all the scientists got gathered around it, and they laughed at it, and they said, it's so human. And so the way that, like, all of the sudden something that was really inanimate, it was just a bunch of springs and some like guts of electronics, was ordained with a personality just because of the way it was acting. That's really exciting. So, like, yeah, what is the name of this thing? How does it behave? On a technical level, just to answer the question, the idea is to draw the pattern actually with the most efficient route possible. And because the pattern is quite complex, all of the little marks that you see there have been collected into one single path. And it's just sometimes the robot is making a mark and sometimes it's not. And so that actually creates this moment where it feels very erratic. but it's really nice and satisfying because I think it'd be very different if that animation just showed the robot drawing from one side of the lawn to the other. I like how it's kind of like darting around. So the time dimension becomes really important, and the personality of the robot that comes forth will also be really interesting. And I'm sure the performers will kind of probably latch onto that as well.
So do you have any other renderings of the project, or are those the only two that you have so far?
Those are the only two at the moment. It's really important to us to work collaboratively, not only with Ragdale, but also with the engineers at these companies, and understand, again, like what the robot can do. So we don't want to kind of get too far ahead of ourselves, because we don't see those things as limitations. They're like tremendous design opportunities. So if the robot can only draw certain shapes, if it can only do certain movements, if it can only be out in the site for a certain amount of time before the battery dies, all of those are dimensions that can go into the design.
Yeah, the way that we talked about it a little bit earlier, just the two of us, is that usually when we design a piece of architecture, we know exactly what we want it to look like, right? And then we spend a lot of time trying to fabricate and construct and, you know, put every part together to get it to look exactly like the original image, the original rendering. And this project has forced us in a really interesting way to think about quite the opposite, in that we actually don't know exactly what it will, quote, look like. It won't be either one of these patterns.
Right.
The final pattern won't be. And it won't even be the same pattern at each performance. I think we'll try to do very, very different patterns at each performance. But we do know what we started out with was how we would make it, right? So it's really, we're letting the making process drive the final output process, which maybe is more typical in other artistic practices, but for architects, we don't usually work that way. And so we're kind of excited about just like letting, you know, getting on the site, experimenting, again, working with the technology. So we're really, you know, we have a million options, but we also have some technical constraints. So we're going to be working between those constraints and, you know, options.
So how the question came through, so about just the programming of the robot. And so how does that process work? What does that look like?
Right. So the way the robot's set up is that it comes with a kind of library of patterns. So you can imagine it's got a baseball field, it's got soccer field, all these kind of things, but it also comes with generic shapes. So square, circle, triangle, that you can set to different dimensions. But then the other way is to actually work with the developers to then take patterns that we design and put them into the robot, which we expect will be the kind of the last few steps. And a lot of that just comes with beginning to understand the language that the robot speaks. So you can think about it as like the driver you use for your printer. You've got the computer and you've got the printer, but they're not going to talk to each other unless there's that driver. Because this isn't a typical application, that driver doesn't exist. Luckily, over the last kind of generation of designers, architects have gotten much, much more savvy with computers, and a lot of us, like myself, are programmers. And so we'll be working with the engineers to do exactly that, to program the robot. And the robot will be fed information that, just to get a little technical and geeky and fun, will be equivalent to something that we would refer to as a G code, which is the language that like your 3D printer might speak if you have a 3D printer. And it's just a fancy way to say an Excel spreadsheet with like lots of locations on it, one after the other after the other. So it's like, hey, robot, go here and paint along the way. Hey, robot, go here, but don't paint. Okay, robot, go here and paint again. It's just going to be like learning how to speak to the robot.
Mm-hmm. So to answer that second question, it's not driving the robot. There is someone. There would be someone there, I think, just to make sure that, you know, with technology, there's always a question mark. But it's not a kind of manual process in the way that you think about maybe somebody lining a sports field.
It's like a Roomba. You know,
yeah, it really is more like a Roomba, where you say, okay, I want the room clean, figure out how to do it. You know, we all say like, we want this pattern, you figure out how to do it, and it will create its own path. We won't be telling it every single step to make.
If I can ask a question, I mean, you guys are talking, we've both benefited from the ability to kind of have the Ragdale Ring be this experimental process to sort of project forward. I'm wondering if you guys have thought about the ability to, like the sort of, not necessarily future life of this particular robot, but just this concept here. It's so exciting because of the economics of it and the impact. And I'm thinking about everything like its ability to translate from like a site like this to the urban environment, you know, and everything going on now between sort of like activism, re-establishing a space and changing how a space is being activated and the ability for graphics to do that, or even things with COVID, like shutting down streets in New York and San Francisco and turning those into restaurant areas. And like the potential for this to have high impact, low cost manipulation of underused areas. And I mean, it's really exciting. Have you guys thought about like the potential for this, like another future
Yeah.
something like Urban Institute?
Absolutely. And we've even talked to the Ragdale Foundation about this a little bit. Regin was mentioning that he's also involved in some nonprofit organizations in Chicago that do things with, you know, urban spaces that don't have tenants or are vacant at the moment, or, you know, like, yeah, we really see this as huge potential for developing this over, you know, several years, Ragdale being the first opportunity that we get to really learn how to do it. And then we can really kind of take this to other spaces. I mean, of course, we couldn't help thinking about this with the street in Washington, D.C., where they painted Black Lives Matter, and just seeing how that kind of aerial photograph of that street just went viral. I mean, for, you know, all the best reasons. And so we're really excited about this, you know, with Google Earth sort of introduced this view to all of us. Like we started becoming accustomed to seeing things from a bird's eye view or from a top down view. And now it just feels really natural actually to see something from drone footage or from an aerial view or all these things. And so we're excited about the possibility of, again, allowing people to inhabit a space when we also really need to be careful for safety. You know, we really can't, you know, being outdoors is something that does seem to be much safer than being indoors. So we're already, you know, very excited that this is an outdoor project. It doesn't rely, you know, people don't have to go to a gallery to see it. So already we're doing, you know, really good for safety on that. But yeah, we want to bring people into it as much as possible, and then also take this project out into the world for sure.
Yeah, but I really like that point, Greg, because I think like it's tempting to just understand it as a kind of pattern making system and fun, but what you're describing is really smart with this notion of like how you can remap the ground plane and begin to re-understand like public areas. And I think it does dovetail well with exactly what you're talking about, like the way people reimagine the use of space. We mentioned this earlier before we started, but we talked with the robotics people and they said one of the most common applications right now is they're being asked by parks departments to come out and mark these gathering circles in public parks that are 6 feet apart, right? And so I think that, and if we want to find inspiration in how this is like landing architecturally, I also think of like the brilliant work of Amanda Williams in Chicago, right? Who repaints houses and begins to allow us to kind of completely understand, re-understand and reinterpret an existing context. And so I think that we would want to have that same attitude about using it in a really critical way, about like deploying it to change perspectives and developing it into a project that exactly what you're talking about, maximum effect, lowest impact possible. I mean, because and this is a kind of a way also that we can kind of reconcile a long-standing kind of hangover of the kind of fabrication project in architecture. Like it's great because it gives architects kind of new agency, new tools, and new ways to work kind of directly and more experimentally. But at the same time, it has tremendous liabilities for like resource use and things like that. And so it's all kind of a larger picture we're talking about. I don't think this isn't a solution because there's a lot of things this can't do, but it just kind of throws something else out there in terms of maybe understanding how we can orchestrate our resources.
And Sam, I think we have time for one more question. I want to leave it to you before we close off.
Yeah, I know that there was a question from Judith about your interest in color playing into this scheme. I know you touched on that, but if you wanted to kind of just summarize that again.
Sure. Yeah. And so one thing that we're working on now is talking to the vendors that sell this specific kind of paint. So, you know, we know that color is going to be an important part of this project. We don't know exactly what it'll be yet, but the paint comes in certain specific colors. And they've also said that we can mix the colors together and there shouldn't be any problem with the performance of the paint. So I think, again, that's something that we're really excited about testing and using kind of all of the colors that are available. But, you know, using them in different ways, and then maybe again kind of evolving over the few months of the performances. So maybe in the first one, we're really interested in the interaction of two colors, or in later ones we're trying to use every color plus color, like really sort of thinking about again how we can work with, and again here's just an image of one of our previous projects that really works with color and works with the relationships between color is really important to us. So maybe not just the kind of red, but the red with the pink, and how, red beside pink starts to look more like a shadow and looks more like a 3D object than two colors side by side. So we're interested in the kind of three-dimensional qualities that are possible, again, just with paint.
And while this design might be quite different, I think that one thing I would point out is that in architecture, typically color is used to code things. So a lot of you might live in a house with a red door and your shutters are a certain color and the walls are a certain color. And that kind of correspondence is kind of fixed, and we call that like color coding. And so this project was about kind of using paint and color more in a painterly way, where maybe the side of one thing might be painted in one way and the other side might be painted another. And so you start to get kind of using color as a source of confusion. We're really interested in the way that we can move away from color coding and into more what we're describing as kind of painterly effects. And so this will be a really exciting project because we're literally using paint on the field. And paint can do things that color in most architecture can't. There's no hard edges. There can be gradients. We can apply one color on top of another while it's still wet and get it to blend together. If the grass is like patchy or there's different kind of surfaces, we can go right from the sidewalk and right onto the lawn and just paint over the entire thing, unifying those two elements. And so all of a sudden, the color becomes a way to remap. Maybe going back to this like earlier point we're talking with Greg about remapping the horizontal plane. And so, yeah, like the color, it's a lot of dimensions, it's a lot of really abstract thinking. So what I'll just say is that this will allow us to experiment with color in a way that's not as architectural as we usually do. And that's really exciting. Because I think that what unifies us also with Greg and Molly and all the fabulous people that have done Ragdale Rings before is we're just always searching for the edges of architecture. And we often have to look outside architecture and drag architecture toward an area that has innovated in a way that we haven't found yet and kind of has us maybe challenging our conventions.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great place to end the conversation for now. And I really appreciate the time. Erik and Ashley from Outpost Office, our 2020 Ragdale Ring competition awardees, and Molly and Greg from sports, who did the 2016 were the 2016 awardees. And so I appreciate all of you spending time on this Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth, by the way. And everyone who joined the conversation, and look forward to the next one. We have 2 more scheduled coming up. And so you can check it out on our Eventbrite page. And then also this will be posted, like I said, on our new forthcoming website. It's going to be on our current website as well. And it's also going to be housed on our YouTube channel. So please go and subscribe to our YouTube channel for not only this video and videos from the POV series, but all kinds of other cool content that we're going to have coming up in 2020 and beyond. So I'll let you close it out, Regin.
Yeah, actually just said everything that I needed to say. I'll just close out with my little PowerPoint here. Thanks everyone for being here. We'll see you again next week. If you're interested in the POV next week, it'll be June 26th at 11 o'clock. We'll be meeting with multimedia painter and sculptor Kenny Gwynn, and at 1 o'clock with Sharon Bridgeforth and Marie Casimir, 2 really remarkable multidisciplinary writers and performers. So thanks again, Ashley, Erik, Molly, Greg, and Sam. Happy Juneteenth and happy Pride Month, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
You guys.
Thank you.
Bye.